It's a well-established fact that you can't have a top 5 best list on YouTube without following it up with a 5 worst list. So for those of you who only want to hear good things about the PlayStation VR, that list is either here, link is also in the description. But for the rest of you who want to know the downsides about PlayStation VR, strap in. I'm Matt from PSV Revolution, and here are the 5 worst things about PlayStation VR. Number 5, the adverts. My word, those adverts. Now VR is an almost brand new medium, and that medium is very difficult to show. Just like it was difficult to demonstrate a HD telly on a standard definition one, it's very difficult to show off what's great about VR on a flat screen. But this Sony, this is not it. Having actors bob their head around like a canary staring at a mirror does not do justice to what VR can do. These actors are clearly that, just actors. It doesn't sell the reality that you're trying to sell. Now there have been some good adverts for VR, things like the reaction interviews which actually show people straight after having tried VR, general members of the public rather than actors, or digitally inserting actors into the environment shown in the game. They're not perfect, but they're much, much better than this. Stop it, Sony. Just stop it. That's a bad Sony. Number 4, the lack of room scale. Now one of the best things about the Vive has been its support for room scale from day one. Now I'm not saying it can't be added in later like it has been with the Rift, but I'm pretty sure that Sony aren't going to want to fragment their market even further by adding more peripherals into the mix, so I think it's pretty much out for this generation of VR. Being able to walk around environment just adds so much more to the immersion, and Sony's decision not to add a second camera or sensor to allow a decent amount of room scale is a shame. Yes, there will be some experiences that will be like room scale, but it's not going to match up to the real thing. Number 3, no Sony brand exclusives. Now Sony has bought some nice exclusives and some nice timed exclusives such as Batman, Resident Evil 7, but there's no showing of any of Sony's biggest hitters at or around launch. It would have been amazing to see an Uncharted experience or a Wipeout game at launch, or any of the other big IPs that are closely associated with Sony, such as God of War, Crash Bandicoot, Gravity Rush, Little Big Planet, Infamous. Okay, sure, the Playroom VR looks like it's a massive step up from the main Playroom game, but it would have been so nice to see some of the more recognizable Sony branded names at launch, and I think they've really missed out by not going out to some of their studios and getting something more personal. Number 2, the PlayStation Store. As I mentioned in my last video, the PlayStation Store will be an asset to the PlayStation VR, but it's also going to be a hindrance to users. At the time of writing, most launch titles aren't even up on the stores around the regions, and the titles that are scattershot at best. Now with different titles being available in different regions, and pricing for many games still hasn't been announced, and this is less than a week before the launch of a new console. Many of these games are digital only, so you can't pick them up alongside your hardware, and whilst discounted sales on the PlayStation Store are a lot better than they used to be, they still pale in comparison to sales on Steam. And once a retail price has been set, the prices rarely budge, unlike the retail prices in store, which tend to drop over time. Now lastly, not all of the games are getting a retail release. This is a real pain because of just how slow the downloads are from the store. Admittedly, it's not a deal breaker, but it's not exactly something that's going to excite customers. Number 1, the PlayStation Move. Now this isn't a complaint specifically about the tracking. It looks like there's still some issues that Sony need to make sure they work out there and make sure that everything works truly for every single customer, because it does look like some websites are having a bit of an issue. But for the most part, it seems like the tracking is actually pretty good as long as the balls aren't occluded. Stop laughing in the back, I see you. Now, as long as the camera can see the tracking balls, everything works out pretty well for the most part. Now, I'm actually talking about the lack of any other physical update to the Move. Sure, haptic feedback would have been really nice. It's really impressive on the Vive controllers, but that might have made them too expensive, and if that's the reason, then fair enough. And yes, using a micro USB as is now standard rather than the older than time itself mini USB would have been good, but I suspect a lot of people will just chuck them in a docking station and they'll forget about what connecting ports it uses anyway. No, I'm talking about the lack of an analog joystick on each controller. You see, for developers, locomotion or the ability to move your character around the game world is really difficult using the Move. Now you might notice that most games that use the Move have you either on rails, sometimes literally, or just standing in one spot. Now I worry that this will mean that most developers will forego the Move as a control option, which is a real shame, because when it's done right and when the moves are working, it's one of the absolute best things about PlayStation VR. Being able to use and see your hands in the game and reach out and touch things just gives an absolute level of immersion that isn't beaten by anything else. And if Sony had just stuck a joystick on each move, it would have been so much simpler for developers to use locomotion in their games. I think it's an absolutely huge missed opportunity, and it's a real shame that we're probably not going to see an upgraded version of the Move until we get an upgraded version of the headset, which hopefully will be a good couple of years away. So, there you have it. Those are my 5 worst things about PlayStation VR. Agree? Disagree? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe. I've been Matt for PSV Revolution, and we'll see you soon.